ladies and gentlemen, prepare to tuck yourselves into a centuries-old slumber party. Because tonight we're taking a jolting journey through the bizarre and somewhat nauseating sleep habits of our medieval forefathers. Yes, you heard that right. Forget your lavender-scented pillows and weighted blankets because back in the day, sleep was as reliable as a jester's joke, full of uncertainty and more than a few face palms. This is Weird Sleep Habits of Medieval People and More, a rollicking romp through the past, where we'll discover that slumber wasn't just an innocent affair of sheep counting, but rather an action-packed episode of snoring, superstition, and shared bed space with livestock. Imagine the delightful aroma of a sheep or cow as your sleep buddy. Go ahead, breathe deep. The medieval way of resting was anything but relaxing. These folks had the audacity to think that dost-off hours could be enhanced by the occasional whiff of manure and the odd goat nibbling at their toes. Who needs an expensive sleep consultant when you can just practice the ancient art of segmented sleeping, where the proud snoozer would wake up every few hours to check the time, the castle gates, and yes, the movements of threatening spirits, because apparently the witching hour was a thing back then, and no one was taking any chances. We'll explore how they turned their beds into spooky battlegrounds against evil forces, including the widely feared witches. Oh, you think your roommates snore too loud? Try listening to a full house of relatives, children, and livestock while simultaneously warding off bad juju. Then there's the heavenly fortress they built around their wooden beds. It was more like a hodgepodge of superstition and design blunders that would make a modern architect weep. Spoiler alert. They didn't have memory foam, but they sure had a lot of imaginative nightmares. We'll also dive into superstitions so outlandish that you'll be grateful to sleep tonight with a nightlight on, and absolutely no livestock nearby. So, strap in, hold on to your feathered pillows, and prepare for a hilarious exploration of medieval nocturnal oddities. Because if rest was a battle, our ancestors fought it like they were at war, and we'll be serving the highlights featuring witches, livestock, and the most bizarre bedtime rituals ever to grace a humble thatched roof. Are you ready? Hope you've brushed up on your medieval lingo because we're about to descend into a dreamland where sleep was a dangerous game, and everybody wanted the best spot on the haystack. Picture this. England, circa the 12th century. The sun is setting in the west, casting an eerie glow over fields dotted with sheep, or, as we like to call them, the medieval wireless internet connection. The air? A blend of freshly plowed earth, burnt bread, and the vague scent of desperation that clings to the attire of the peasant class. As the village bell tolls for the not-so-diligent, our protagonist is none other than Sir Reginald Lethargic, a knight of questionable valor known for his uncanny ability to locate the nearest haystack for an afternoon snooze rather than the nearest enemy. Dressed in rusty chainmail that hasn't seen a good polishing since the last crusade, Sir Reginald stumbles into his thatched roof abode and prepares for his pre-dinner nap, a medieval power move par excellence. This is no ordinary slumber, oh no. It's a ritual steeped in absurdity, the correct placement of the knight's left foot over his right while clutching a hind leg of mutton just in case he dreams of turkey leg cannon fodder. His wife, Lady Aubergine, eyes him suspiciously from across the room as if he could wake up a valiant warrior, but instead just snores like a breach in a ship's hull. As Sir Reginald descends into his dreamscape, A chorus of cattle lowing outside and the faint whistle of the mill buzzing in the background sets an ambiance reminiscent of a poorly funded Renaissance festival. Before long, the visions come. Dragons with the heads of annoying villagers instead of majestic beasts, lady knights demanding nap time, and the most chaotic of all nightmares, being accused of not using enough cologne on a less-than-pleased peasant who just wanted a local gossip. Throughout the village, sleep was a coveted treasure, often pursued like the Holy Grail itself. Tales spread of a mysterious potion made from goat hair and rosemary that promised to cause lengthy slumbers free from the nightmares of angry relatives or the fear of sieges. However, like every good medieval remedy, there was a catch. You'd be waking up with more hair on your body than a yeti on holiday. Just when Sir Reginald begins to reach the peak of his absurdly tranquil dream, a sharp, shrill cry pierces through the veil of sleep, echoing against the stone walls. Lady Aubergine, armed with a wooden spoon, is declaring war on the bedbugs, a grand conspiracy against their nightly reprieve. His dreams are interrupted as she proclaims she's never sharing a bed with a man who allows such transgressions. The ensuing chaos is legendary, complete with equal parts heroism and hysteria, as Sir Reginald valiantly attempts to reclaim his snooze time while fending off the tiny invaders, perhaps questioning his life choices for the very first time. Historically, what seems like a whimsical anecdote reflects a deeper truth. The sleeping habits of the medieval period were fraught with dire perils and societal norms as sinister as marital obligations. The evidence suggests that villagers sometimes napped in shifts, propping themselves up against their prized goats for warmth and comfort. Who needs luxury bedding when you can have livestock, right? And what do we learn from this bestiary of bizarre slumber? Embrace your daily nap like Sir Reginald, unless a lady with a wooden spoon is nearby. Welcome to the 13th century, a time when even sleeping arrangements were as complicated as the plots of royal betrayals. The scene is set in a dimly lit castle chamber, illuminated by the eerie glow of a dozen sputtering candles, their wax dripping like the hopes of a poor peasant trying to get a good night's sleep. The air is thick with incense, designed to ward off evil spirits, or at least the smell of the previous day's meat stew and the low hum of snoring lords who haven't bothered to invest in a decent pillow. Enter our protagonist, Lord Edgar the Anxious, whose primary fear in life is that an errant sheep will invade his dreams and demand to be knighted. Merging noble blood with a healthy dose of paranoia, Edgar has decided that resting is for the weak, and that embracing every sleep theory written by monks is the path to longevity, or at least a few more nights without nightmares. His nocturnal philosophy? Napping isn't just for the midday slump, it's an art form. But in a culture obsessed with superstitions, there's a whimsical twist. Each nap must adhere to strict medieval etiquette, which mandates rather odd rituals that would baffle even the most seasoned life coaches today. As dusk falls, the castle falls into its bedtime routine of bizarre preparations. The servants are summoned to align the Lord's bed with the stars, which really means dragging a ruler and a compass through the drafts of the cold stone walls. They sprinkle crushed lavender, or as some suspect, just old socks, on the sheets because who needs a sleep study when you've got aromatherapy on a budget? But the real pièce de résistance is the nightly sleepless ceremony. You see, it has become customary for knights to gather around the slumbering lord, engaged in a competition of who can utter the most absurd threats to any lurking nightmares. "I will smite thee, foul creature of my psyche," they shout, all while precariously balancing their goblets of ale, which seem far more threatening than any nightmare could possibly be. As Lord Edgar settles down, the tension escalates. Can this valiant leader brave the trials of sleep essential for ruling effectively? Or will he flounder like an untrained squire at his first joust? Suddenly, the room goes silent, a rare moment, and not for the lack of drunken self-importance, but because Lord Edgar has inexplicably lost the battle to stay awake. Fueled by lavender, ale, and pep talks, he drifts into slumber, only to be jolted awake moments later by the thunderous proclamation of Sir Roland. "A dragon! A dragon in your dreams!" The knights erupt into raucous laughter as Edgar flails wildly, mistaking his bedding for the belly of the beast. By dawn, they'll all be recounting the tale of Lord Edgar's midnight duel against imaginary foes over breakfast. Spoiler: nobody wins. And what does history teach us? If you haven't made a fool of yourself in front of your friends after a night of serious nap-casting, can you really call it a medieval experience? So, the takeaway: picture this. England circa 1180, where noble knights who were meant to be chivalrous and stoic apparently had a little nocturnal secret. They snored like dragons on fire. Yes, the very same valorous warriors who fought valiant battles against Saracens were also waging war against unwelcome nighttime sounds, and their intimate battles were not catalogued in historical epics, despite being worthy of a mythical bard's ballad. In the opulent castle of King Arthur, the air between grand oak beams remains thick with the smell of sweat, old leather armor, and a hint of curiosity about tonight's meaty feast. The flickering torches cast absurdly elongated shadows where you might expect to find gallant warriors. Yet what's actually gathered is a snooze fest of epic proportions. Meet Sir Gawain, a knight known for both his bravery in battle and his remarkable ability to consume the largest roast beef in the land while slumbering. The moment he drifts into the realm of Nod, his silhouette becomes a human foghorn, resonating through the stone corridors, sending nearby rats scrambling for their lives. Oh, how the other knights would envy his boastful slumber. Yet, it's not just Gawain. Every knight brings his own unique contributions to the night symphony. Sir Bedivere blesses the air with a nasal serenade, thick enough to suffocate a barn full of crows, and Lancelot, the self-proclaimed Dream Master, who boasts of a fondness for fantastical visions of dragon duels, sounds like a wounded dragon himself. Meanwhile, Merlin, the supposed wise wizard, spends the nocturnal hours brewing potions to curse the knights, or at least to keep them from waking all neighbors, but instead finds himself navigating a realm of insomnia, wishing his enchanted sleep spells weren't the stuff of rank legend. At this point, Merlin probably wished he had included some snoring remedies in his witchy repertoire. The antics don't stop at snoring. A fully fledged dream interpretation subculture emerges. Knights anxiously discuss how front teeth falling out in dreams could signal a battle loss, or merely that they'd had cabbage soup for dinner. Yet the enthusiasm quickly shifts to a debate on whether Gawain eating 3 whole swans counted as a vision of true bravery, or just an ill-fated drunken misadventure. Because, in every night's sleep cycle, great mysteries must emerge. just when tension swells as whispers of paranoia rise about King Arthur's increasing wrath over disruptive sleep, a collective realization strikes. There's a reek permeating the air. Bedivere, still fumbling over his half-remembered confidence in dream logic, accidentally silences them with a dramatic proclamation that basil is a cure for snoring. Thus begins a fresh controversy about whether it will be infused into stew or chai, as it's obviously more deserving than Gawain's record-breaking roasts. In an unexpected twist, during the cacophony of snoring, a plant-eating dragon was awakened nearby. The knights, thinking they had conjured the legendary beast with their snoring, stumble out of their dreams and charge into battle only to trip over each other in a jealous fit of misplaced honor. Turns out, dragons are just as peeved about nocturnal noises as noble knights. So, the lesson here: in the great medieval cycle of life, never underestimate the dimly lit tavern music. The year? Somewhere in the 14th century. The setting? A smoky medieval tavern, where the wood-beamed ceiling almost seems to sag in sympathy with the patrons who dangle between euphoric drunkenness and impending sleep. The air is thick with the odors of damp straw, sweat, fermented barley, and something you guess must have once been a chicken. Here we find our key characters, a raucous gathering of locals enthusiastically distorting the concept of nightlife. There's Hilda, a barmaid with a dubious hygiene record and a bedroll large enough to qualify as an extra guest at the inn. A group of merry jesters who practice the fine art of accidentally spilling ale on unsuspecting customers. And a knight, Sir Bumblesalot, who might have won his title in a game of chance rather than valor, sporting a breastplate that smells suspiciously of last summer's bearings. As the tavern fills with the mellifluous sounds of off-key singing, someone inexplicably decides that this is the perfect time for a round of responsible napping, because, apparently, nothing says party like the prospect of drooling into your own tankard. Now, medieval napping was an art form of utmost absurdity, drawing upon traditions that would make even the most avant-garde of sleep scientists raise a skeptical eyebrow. In an age where the concept of personal space was as whimsical as finding a free bath, properly executing a medieval nap involved a set of steps that, if taken literally, might have been documented in a self-help guide titled The Deeply Disturbing Practice of Napping, a Medieval Approach. Step 1. Pillows were usually optional. If one was brave, a sack filled with some straw could pass for comfort. Bonus points if you could convince yourself it was still fresh. Step 2. Choose your time. This could range from a questionable 2-hour repose during the day to a full-on let's hibernate until spring situation, leading to the kind of spontaneous sleep that would have looked great in a Renaissance painting if only someone had bothered to paint it. Step 3. Employ appropriate techniques to avoid waking up in a state of panic. Locals found that using drunken snoring as a sound barrier was effective enough. However, sharing a bed with more than one pig was often discouraged for the sake of olfactory well-being. As the night progresses, Hilda makes an appearance, triumphantly balancing a tray stacked high with groaning wine pitchers that seem to magically refill themselves before anyone has a chance to blink. This veritable banquet of drunkenness leads Sir Bumblesalot to put his napping skills to the test. With regal flair, he sinks onto a table, and as he attempts a noble face-first in ale position, it becomes painfully evident that an ounce of ale has invaded his nostrils. There's a gasp, his friends start shouting, "Not a drow nap, sir!" only to fall into a frenzy of laughter that echoes through the hall like a dozen ill-trained sheep. Just when you think the scene couldn't get more absurd, a cat leaps onto the table, turns softly around, and claims its territory by ostentatiously sitting on Sir Bumble Salot's head. Unfazed, he manages a gurgled snore, claiming victory over both the alcohol and the feline intruder in a dazzling display of medieval multitasking. And thus, the tavern collectively learns a valuable lesson. It's not about where you sleep, but how humorously you can nap among unbathed companions and curious cats. So remember, in the immortal words of medieval colleagues everywhere, if at first you don't succeed at napping, simply lay down and let the ale take you to dreamland. Q. The ominous melodrama. The year is somewhere in the 14th century. The setting? A simplistic but chaotic marketplace in the heart of medieval London, bustling with noise, miasma, and the delightful scent of unidentifiable fermented goods. Amid the chaos, our protagonist is a weary, disgruntled peasant named Renthal, so tired that if he were to lean an inch, he'd probably topple over like a hastily built haystack. Why so tired, you ask? Well, for Renthal, sleep isn't just a nightly reprieve. It's practically a battleground for survival against all sorts of unpleasantries, from dream assassins to the dreaded blanket stealers. In this era, snoozing in public is not just commonplace, it's an Olympic sport. Nap like your life depends on it, because in the medieval world, it very well could. Around him, the marketplace is a cacophony of cowbell jingles, merchants hawking rancid fruits, and street urchins peddling dubious medicinal remedies that smell of desperation and goat. The people talk, loud and obnoxious, mostly about how Renthal snores louder than a wild boar, and how his dreams involve a lot of angry cheese rolling towards him, ready to enact vengeance. As Renthal briefly dozes off standing, propped against a cart of turnips, he dreams of sock puppet nights and cabbage-related conquests, blissfully unaware that he's the unsuspecting star of today's highlight reel for the town's sharp-witted news hawkers. But wait, there's more. You see, back in the day, it wasn't enough just to sleep. One must also ward off evil spirits, bad dreams, and the occasional soul-sucking fairy. Enter the peculiar ritualism of medieval sleep, which involved an aromatic blend of herbs, goat hair, and, unbelievably, the teeth of a trout. Yes, I know. Each item was specifically chosen to evoke a certain sort of good dream karma. Not having the right herbs could lead to nightmares, or worse yet, dreams where your bread rolls dance around in mockery of your inadequacies. As Renthal drifts deeper into his slumber, an inquisitive cat, let's call her Lady Whiskers, decides to investigate. Ever so quietly, she pounces into Renthal's dreams, determined to reclaim the power of the nap that her human friend has so foolishly squandered. In a foray that could only be described as feline intervention, she swipes at the dream cheese rolling toward Renthal, causing him to leap awake as if he's been dunked in cold water by the royal court jester. The stunned peasants gather around with bated breath. Was it exotic nightmares that jolted him awake? Had he finally taken the leap to retribution against the dairy products of his nightmares? No, he simply jumped because he was scared of a cat, a furry manifestation of extreme embarrassment. All eyes on Renthal, who, upon realizing it was just a cat, bursts into laughter, ending the tension that had piled up like barrels of pickled herring. Indeed, everyone had expected rumors of spectacular nightmare battles, but a cat was all it took to bring the house down. And thus, sleep once again earns its dubious title as the realm of unpredictability. Renthal goes on to become a local legend not for his swordsmanship, but for his cat-induced awakening, providing an unintentional lesson about how nightmares aren't nearly as terrifying as nosy felines who'd rather be sleeping. So, what's the takeaway? Always take your cat's obsession with dreams as the utmost priority. After all, dreams are a sensitive issue when your co-sleeper might become a co-conspirator. Picture this. The year is 1327, and we find ourselves in an opulent castle somewhere in England, standing amid a cacophony that sounds like a symphony of snoring mixed with the faint sound of flapping tapestries. The atmosphere is cloaked in dim, flickering candlelight, and the smell of unwashed linens mingles with the lingering aroma of last week's rabbit stew. As the castle awakens to its most illustrious nighttime spectacle, the noble slumber. Enter our protagonist, Sir Reginald of Snorrington, whose epic nightly battles against the demons of his extravagant sleep accessory, a feather-stuffed pillow that could easily double as a small child, have entered local lore. He has a bed so grand it requires a butler just to fluff the pillows. Tonight, however, his dreams are no ordinary escapism. He's on a quest to vanquish the terrifying specter known only as the nightmare of the unwashed peasant. While the noble class snoozes like royal logs, the sounds emanating from their chambers are alarmingly absurd. A raucous melange of heroic battle cries, snoring competitions, and the occasional sleep-talking about sheep, the latter of which is thought to be the only spiritual connection with the common folk ever attempted. And what about the castle maids? They aren't immune to medieval oddity. They're just a few feet away, tucked into their straw-filled sacks, trying not to breathe in the smell of their employer's ill-timed midnight cheese binge. To bring even more absurdity into the realm of sleep, we must acknowledge the mystical. Medieval folks had wild notions of the snoozefest being ripe for supernatural influence. It wasn't unusual for villagers to sprinkle dreaming herbs before bed, hoping for visions of destiny. Forget your random, chaotic dreams, they would say. It's the herbal essence that divines if you end up king or fool. As if serpentinite oil and milk thistle could overhaul an entire fate. And yet, here's where the tension truly arises. One can't simply dream without the right tools. Among alarming trends was the noble practice of sleep paralysis rituals. Sir Reginald was convinced that if he strapped 5 garlic cloves to his bedpost, he would keep the demon nightmares at bay, and perhaps enjoy a lucid dream about winning at jousting. Besides, no one wants to wake up to find a sprite has inflicted woes upon their peaceful night's repose. However, instead of banishing nightmares, Sir Reginald merely found himself trapped beneath a pile of overly ambitious linens one fateful night, blanketed in confusion. The staff panicked, believing he had been cursed. The local seer was summoned, a scrawny man with dramatic robes who proclaimed that Sir Reginald's only hope was to reenact the final joust. Only then could he escape his fabric confinement, all while wearing the garlic of protection naturally. As dawn broke and he finally emerged, disheveled but victorious over his bedding, Sir Reginald declared to the assembled crowd that he did indeed battle several ethereal forces during his night of suffering. Alas, The townsfolk had thoroughly enjoyed that morning's amusing spectacle more than they cared who had won the grand pangs of sleep. Thus, what can we learn from the dreams and misadventures of medieval slumber? Remember that no pillow is devoid of folly, and perhaps staying awake to appreciate one's own snoring isn't such a bad idea. Imagine, if you will, the year 1204. The place, a rustic, draughty manor in the English countryside, wafting with the delightful aroma of mildew and unwashed peasants. The soundscape, a captivating melody of snoring, creaking floors, and the faint howl of something quite possibly a small demon lurking in the shadows. Welcome to the world of medieval nightlife, where your idea of sweet dreams was more like waking nightmare. Gathered around the fireplace are the key characters. Sir Gregor, a man attempting to bask in nobility despite his questionable hygiene. Lady Edith, a noblewoman who wishes she were any place else. And last but not least, the resident cat, Whiskers, who has somehow learned the fine art of indifferent disdain. What's for dinner seems unimportant as we zoom in on their sleeping arrangements. Wooden beds crammed into a single room like sardines in a crudely crafted medieval tin. As night creeps in, shadows morph into psychological horror. Who needs a bedtime story when you can listen to the night watchman sputtering tales of headless ghosts outside your window? But before turning in for the night, there's one crucial preparation, the ritual of Fear the Unseen. Adorned in woolen nightgowns which feel like receiving a warm hug from an angry sheep, our noble folk engage in the nightly ritual of inspection. Lady Edith dutifully makes sure to peer under the bed, not just for dust bunnies, but also for potential assassins or rogue rats looking to gnaw on their socks. Sir Gregor insists on checking the corners of the room with a flaming torch, because nothing says sophistication like illuminating your potential doom. Is that a bundle of straw? Or is it plotting against me? He muses, before collapsing into bed, blissfully unaware that the most dangerous thing in the room is probably the stale bread he left under his pillow. Undeterred by the horrors of their surroundings, they settle down for a well-deserved sleep, whittling their worries away, or so they think. Beware of the snoozes, nagging entities. Did you know that medieval folk believed that the spirits of the unquiet dead could invade your dreams? Cue Sir Gregor's night filled with visions of long-dead knights roaring for vengeance because he didn't water their potato patch. Pretty intense for a night of good rest. Just when you think it's safe to sleep, Whiskers, the judgy feline, leaps onto Sir Gregor's face, gracing him with a wake-up claw that would make a seasoned assassin proud. Meanwhile, Lady Edith, longing for the luxury of the distant future, a lavish, king-sized Tempur-Pedic, can't help but ponder whether she's really meant to live on 3 inches of hay. The highlight of her night comes when the joyously irritating village rooster crows at the crack of dawn, in his own gentle way of mocking the very idea of sleep. In this world, sleep is merely a battleground, and those brave enough to challenge its futility gain impressive experiences filled with dread. And in this tale of medieval bliss, the message rings loud and clear. Why dream of sugar-plum fairies when you can have the paranoid nightmare of medieval bedbugs dancing on your pillow? Ultimately, if you're planning on indulging in an evening of dreams, choose wisely. You might wake up with a rooster's approval, and no one ever wants to be the laughingstock of their own night. Picture this. Europe, 1350 AD. the moon casting wobbly shadows over the cobblestone streets of a small village. The night is alive with the sounds of howling wolves, the distant clanging of armor, and the not-so-distant smell of what can only be described as day-old cheese fermenting in the backyard. In a thatched roof cottage, we find our protagonist, a humble peasant named Mildred. Bedtime is fast approaching, but before sleep claims her, she has an important decision to make. Should she grab her trusty chamber pot or put faith in the absolute darkness of the night? Tonight, however, is a special night. Just outside her window, the local knight is holding a rather loud feast to celebrate conquering nothing, really. But who would waste an opportunity to throw a party while bragging about the glories of heroism? A table groaning under the weight of stale bread and questionable meat is the centerpiece of this absurd merriment. As the festivities escalate, so does Mildred's anxiety. Our dear knight, Sir Wibberley the Wobbly, has found himself a touch too merry. He drunkenly threatens to dismiss the peace treaty he wielded so proudly during past tournaments, contemplating, perhaps, whether it might be a good idea to challenge that very treaty to a friendly duel. But fear not, there are precautions. You see, medieval knights were riddled with superstition. Amulets against nightmares? Check. Salt by the door? Check. A sleeping pot that has survived 5 generations, rumored to ward off evil spirits. Although it's mostly just an ancient ladle, double check. Everything is in place for a good night's sleep, except for the impending night party that sounds like a rock concert echoing through the village. Just as Mildred hopes her illusions of slumber might take off like a broomstick in a fairy tale, the knight, fortified with too many tankards of ale, stumbles into her yard, eyes glazed and sword unsheathed, determined to slay the evil spirits. The dangers of medieval sleeping only intensify at this point. The moment the knight trips over his own shoelaces, falling head first into a pile of manure, the atmosphere takes a turn for the ridiculous. As he pulls himself from the muck, juices of past meals dripping from his armor, Sir Wibberley proclaims, "Behold my triumph over evil." Unsurprisingly, the only triumph was his ability to smell worse than the night air. Mildred can't help but laugh. What appeared to be a night of doom quickly spiraled into a slapstick comedy. Her worries about unholy phantoms start to dissipate as Sir Wibberley, now less knightly and more like the court jester, begins to entertain the village with tales of his bravery, and a very detailed recounting of the number of burritos consumed during the latest castle feast. And so, as Mildred drifts off to sleep surrounded by the distant sounds of drunken revelry, she learns one golden lesson. While the shadows may hold terror, it's often the sheer ridiculousness of life that lulls you to sleep. Who knew sleeping near a knight could be so entertaining? So what's the takeaway from this fairy tale medieval fiasco? Long live absurdity. When it comes to the peculiarities of sleep, welcome to a dimly lit castle in the year 1372, where the only thing more unsettling than the drafty architecture is the kingdom's bizarre approach to sleep. As torches flicker ominously, casting shadows that playfully dance across the stone walls, the unmistakable scent of roasted boar wafts through the air, mingling with the far less appealing odor of the local peasantry. Here, among the echoes of clanging metal and the distant wails of disgruntled servants, we find our heroes, a motley crew of knights battling not only for glory, but for the perfectly timed afternoon nap. Yes, dear viewers, welcome to the world of medieval napping, where feats of bravery and grace were often rivaled by an audacious dedication to snoozing. Among them stands Sir Reginald the Slothful. Clad in armor so heavy, it's rumored he has only ever worn it to bed and not on the battlefield, preferring instead to show off his pajamas. An opulent silk ensemble embroidered with questionable art depicting dragons napping. Each afternoon, the knights would gather in the great hall, not to discuss strategies, but to engage in the ritual of the snooze duel. Imagine a concert of choking snores mixed with rhythmic drooling. The goal? To overpower fellow knights with the sheer volume of their slumbering prowess. Sir Reginald, with his impressive technique, could often be seen practicing his deep breaths, delighting in the slight vibrations that would rattle the decor. As the sun dipped low, the tension would mount, with knights eyeing their massive bowls of porridge, believing that the thicker the porridge, the thicker the dreams they'd have. Hearty bowl for a hearty snooze, they would proclaim, trusting that a belly full of sludge would further aid their slumber. However, the true absurdity began with the notorious killer tea, a mystical brew believed to induce the kind of deep sleep that even a dragon couldn't pierce. Legends whispered of its ingredients, a blend of herbs and the whispers of forgotten dreams, brewed by the castle witch, Granny Bogwort, but caution had to be taken. It was mandatory to recite the nap-time oath before consumption, lest one become a stiff knight in a very rude awakening. One fateful afternoon, as the knights prepared for the ultimate brawl of slumber, Sir Reginald accidentally fell into a porridge coma, endangering his undefeated title. Chaos ensued when the other knights attempted to jostle him awake, only to realize the best they could achieve was a rather elaborate wrestling match with a human burrito. Sautéed emotions and ownership of the nap crown heightened the absurdity, with Sir Reginald facing a real dilemma: sleep or be dethroned. In a twist of fate, as dawn was rising and the capitulation of dreams came to bear, the knights believed a phantom appeared. It was none other than the ghost of an ancient king, here to reclaim his lost glory or perhaps his lost naps. A prank pulled by a fellow knight escalated the confusion and intensified the horrors of a waking life, sending the knights scattering, running away from the realization that their comfort zones had turned into nightmares. Historically speaking, this charming spectacle does reveal the medieval fascination, or more accurately, obsession, with sleep. Amidst plagues and wars, it was ironic that a bunch of armored knights perhaps just wanted a little RR instead of a round of battle. So, what's the takeaway? In medieval castles, even the mightiest warriors know the value of a good nap. Because, remember, in the battle of fatigue versus valor, sometimes the best strategy is just to sleep through it all. Cue the dim candlelight and the rustle of bed linens, for we find ourselves in the year 1472, amid the grandiose chamber of a medieval king. The room is perfumed with an aromatic blend of scented oils, damp hay, and the undeniable essence of body odor, a smell that could knock a knight off his horse. It's nap time, and not just your everyday siesta, mind you, but the sacred royal rest that sends shivers down the spines of servants everywhere. Enter King Thaddeus the Unbreakable. His enormous form is sprawled among a disturbingly ornate pile of pillows, all expertly embroidered to ensure maximum discomfort while allowing zero sleep. Tonight's main feature? A lavish banquet followed by a post-dinner nap. The sort of nap that can only be described as heroic in its absurdity. A band of lute playing minstrels tinkers nervously in the corner, desperately hoping their melody won't be interrupted by a spontaneous royal snore that's always 2 decibels shy of a thunderstorm. In a kingdom where napping is an extreme sport, death by sleepiness isn't the only concern. You see, medieval rulers were plagued by the whimsical superstitions surrounding slumber. Dreams weren't simply dreams, but potent omens. A king could be deposed if he awoke from a nightmare about a wretched goat, clearly a sign from the heavens that trouble brewed. To add to the thrill of nightmares and nightmares still, there was the lurking fear of sleep demons. Yes, sleep demons, which medieval lore claims were real, could literally sap the whims of a sleepy sovereign. As the king ventures into unconsciousness, his trusted advisor, Sir Whimsington, whispers frantically about the new practice, sleep vigilance. Each night, loyal guards stand at the door, dressed more like the king's sentinels of sudden awakening. Clad in ridiculous, oversized armor, they nervously clutch their swords, praying they wouldn't need to use them in the assault against sleep itself. To wake the king, they've been trained in an elaborate series of life-threatening physical gestures. A shake, a gentle tap, or the all-important hair-rending panic scramble, because heaven forbid the sleeping sovereign miss the latest gossip about court politics. Now, amidst all this snoozing suspense, there's the moment where the dreadful nap takes a twist. In his dream, the king chases a parade of dancing peasants, all waving flags made of bacon, because, of course, this is an absolute necessity for any royal vision. Only, upon awakening from this bacon-fueled escapade, he lurches upright and, in a state of haphazard clarity, shouts, "Bring me the bacon!" The guards, rushing in, misunderstood this directive. Instead of food, they bring in the royal bards to entertain him with tales of his glorious feats. Naturally, when he opens his eyes, a symphony erupts at blaring volume, right next to his ear. The poor king drowns in a pitchy rendition of his last battle, savoring none of the bacon he so eagerly desired. Now, about those superstitious literacies. Historians argue this bizarre fear of sleep was used by those in power to exert control over the very act of resting. Sleep became not just a personal endeavor, but an event steeped in ritual, all thanks to an obsession with dreams and whether a goat was watching you from nearby. So what's the takeaway here? A nap might seem innocent, but in a medieval kingdom, it's a high-stakes game of political chess, and every royal dream could end with waking up to a chorus of discontent. Remember, ensure your guards are musicians. It might secure you peace from your own dreams. Or simply stay awake, but remember, not every goat is a bad omen. Picture this. You, a humble serf in medieval England, awake at the crack of dawn to greet the chirping birds and the faint aroma of burning straw. It's around the year 1305, and your day is bound to stretch long as a royal hangover. Before you can even manage a sip of your bitter ale for breakfast, you're forced into labor by your overlord's son. A chap whose enthusiasm for the feudal system is only rivaled by his natural talent for nagging. Now, let's talk about your state of sleep. It is your right, nay, your duty, to indulge in the most rigorous of lunchtime naps. You see, the medieval concept of sleeping was a tad unconventional by today's standards. It was less about comfort and more about maximizing productivity while simultaneously avoiding ever-increasing taxes. Imagine dim, flickering orange light from the lone tallow candle as you scrounge in the corner of the barn for a respectable pile of straw to lay upon. The earthy smells of manure and the lingering aroma of last week's failed stew fill the air, making you feel cozy in that unique, I might die any minute kind of way. In a far-off corner, Sir Reginald, the reluctant farmer, grumbles as he attempts to keep his half-functioning goat from eating his only pair of trousers. So, you snuggle into your cozy straw bed, your dreams filled with visions of sugar plums, also known as not starving to death, and as you're just beginning to doze off snooze, you're rudely awoken by the unwavering clamor of a rooster that correctly assumes it possesses the authority to dictate your personal schedule. Here in the Middle Ages, everyone believed in a specific sleep strategy called biphasic sleeping, a concept that sounds vaguely scientific but was actually rooted in sheer necessity. The typical workday started with the sunrise, a time when even the laziest peasant musters some motivation, and that motivation had a name: desperation. As soon as the sun dipped low, it was nap time. Yes, an afternoon snooze that strategically exceeded just a few minutes. We're talking about a full, till I'm drooling on myself, power nap, all while remaining hyper-aware that bandits could be scaling your haystack at any moment. So you practically sleep with one foot on the ground, or a shovel, whichever is closer. And let's not forget the delightful exercise of being woken every few hours by the medieval practice of watchmen screaming various nonsensical warnings as if the entire world were about to collapse. But here's the kicker. Being a peasant was an absolute dream compared to the nocturnal habits of the nobility. They relished in this strange frenzy of nighttime parties as a veritable buffet of rich meats and goblets of wine leading to louder snoring than a herd of hibernating bears. Just imagine a castle filled with moans of indigestion echoing through stone walls. While outside, the peasants were practically spooning each other for warmth in their makeshift beds. Now, you'd think that all this sleep deprivation would lead to serious fatigue. But fear not. Medieval folks had mastered the art of utilizing lack of sleep as an excuse to be even more grumpy and complaint-laden than your average parliamentary debate. So what should we take away from this feathery fable of disheveled snoozers? Next time you find yourself unable to function due to a lack of Z's, just remember, in the Middle Ages, missing sleep was an opportunity for communal bonding, and avoiding taxation was to picture it. A dimly lit medieval village at the foot of a twitchy mountain, circa 1123 AD. The place reeks of something between wet sheep and dubious cheese, while the sounds of high-pitched banshee-like wails of angry townsfolk clash with the nightly chorus of livestock. In the center lies Our Lady of Unfortunate Sleep Hygiene, a rickety, thatched-roof inn where scores have come to rest, assuming they can find actual rest amid the chaotic cacophony of sheep trying to sneak into the alehouse. Enter our main character, Constance, a local night watcher tasked with ensuring no one sneaks a pint meant for the sheep rather than the villagers. Constance, though sleepy and slightly tipsy herself, checks in on the sleeping arrangements and finds not just dog-eared mattresses, but also a parade of early medieval oddities. Ornate beds, which could either be dreamy cocoons or decidedly high-end torture devices, depending on your view of sleeping in a box that reeks of past wool gatherings. Now, Constance has her share of superstitions as well. It is said that if you place a dead cat beneath your bed, it will ward off bad dreams. Naturally, with a village full of stray cats and one particularly grumpy Tom who fancies himself a king, the inn's underbelly resembles an ancient feline graveyard. So, Constance's nighttime tension builds as she prepares for the ultimate test of sleep. How many cats does one need under the bed to actually dream about goats singing lullabies? The absurdity doesn't stop there. In rural areas, folks swore by sleeping with a knife under the pillow for protection against demons, or snoozing at an awkward angle to avoid locking eyes with imaginary bogeymen lurking in the shadows. And just when you think things couldn't get weirder, local folklore tells us that witches could steal your soul while you drooled. Thus, Constance, with a slight hangover from her own misadventures, watches as young maidens instinctively resort to using garlic and thorns as protective talismans, forming a rather bizarre nocturnal fashion statement. But wait, the twist? Late one night, Constable Geoffrey arrives claiming the sheep have started to plot their revenge, incensed by the townsfolk's poorly timed mutton chops and questionable shearing techniques. As she steps outside to negotiate a peace treaty, or perhaps a troubling sense of sleep deprivation creeps in, Constance stumbles upon a peculiar sight. A flock of sheep arranging themselves in a worryingly coordinated circle while softly baying a mesmerizing tune similar to a terrible medieval lullaby. Who knew that sheep could be the answer to catching some zzzz in this woolly nightmare? As folk gathered to witness this spectacle, any notion of ominous nighttime antics dissolved into fits of laughter. Turns out, the key to a peaceful slumber was merely understanding that sheep were not only fluffy friends, but also, surprisingly, the most annoying bedtime storytellers known to man. Through the thick curtain of hilarity, it seems the medieval takeaway is simple. Before you worry about a witch stealing your soul, first consider sleeping with some woolly companions at your side. After all, solace can come from the most unexpected sources, preferably the one that doesn't require your soul. Cue the spectral howling of wolves and the flickering of candlelight. The year, 1347. The place, a drafty stone castle somewhere in England, where the floor is covered in straw and the air is a delightful blend of dampness and not-so-dried sweat. As the sun lowers behind the hills, villagers gather for the evening, not to enjoy a pleasant meal, but to fret about sleep, or the absence thereof. Enter Sir Reginald, a nobleman whose crown seems to weigh heavier than his sanity. He paces back and forth, cloaked in furs that smell suspiciously of old cheese and despair, mumbling about his latest insomnia-induced revelations. Tonight, he will regale his servants with tales of demonic nightmares and sleep paralysis. After all, it's a 2-for-1 deal. Entertainment and a wake-up call that confirms everyone's fears about life decisions. The atmosphere is thick with tension, punctuated by the distant clang of a blacksmith hammering out his woes, the occasional screech of a raven, and the unmistakable stench of last night's mutton stew lingering like a bad memory. The villagers, meanwhile, brace themselves for sleep, the kind where dreams tumble like unwelcome visitors at a dinner party. Our Lord believes the best remedy for poor slumber is not a potion or a bedtime story, but rather a series of rituals driven by absolute bonkers superstition. First, he insists everyone must sleep facing the wall, so as not to invite wayward spirits into their dreams. Naturally, their version of sleep is a patchwork of tossing and turning and wondering if last week's fish caught from the nearby river might have actually been a mermaid's cursed tuna. Tension escalates as fearful whispers of evil spirits and the restless souls of long-dead friends flutter around the room. "Don't poke the dream demons," a serving girl hisses, her eyes wide with an alarming flicker of belief, while men in the back nod, as if this craziness is the only way to maintain their grip on their frail sanity. One brave knight, Sir Bedwin, suggests that perhaps they should simply stay awake all night, a total enlightenment strategy, or possibly just an excuse to binge on stale bread. But wait, just when you think our medieval folk might actually embrace the only thing scarier than their dreams, sleep itself, Sir Reginald has a bright idea involving a spiced concoction of herbs that supposedly grants dreams of wealth and happiness. His method consists of mixing exotic herbs with extremely local ingredients, ensuring every troubled soul wakes up either rich in dreams but possibly plagued by gastrointestinal regret. As villagers hover over the bubbling cauldron, skepticism and desperation mingle openly, akin to a treaty between suspicious peasants and hopeful dreamers. They each take a sip, with Sir Reginald proclaiming, "Drink deep, for you shall reap thoughts of gold." What they quickly discover is that the only thing abundant was a shared experience of powerful flatulence, interrupted only by the realization that dreams of wealth do not come free. They come with a serious comedic twist. And as dawn breaks, the villagers bolt upright, gasping for air, collectively united by a ghastly stench that could only come from a recipe gone wrong. Remember, even nightmares can have a side of hilarity, especially when the morning sun burns the remnants of the previous night's decisions. So, what's the moral? If you want to conquer the realm of dreams, make sure to choose your recipes wisely, or at least to keep a window open in case the night turns murky. Better that than a demon chasing you outside. On a chilly evening in a 14th century English village, the moon hangs like a suspicious cheese wheel in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the thatched rooftops. Inside a cramped peasant's hut, smells of unwashed bodies, hay, and something vaguely reminiscent of cabbage permeate the air, while the snoring of a dozen family members rings out as a chorus of discordant harmonies. Welcome to medieval sleeping arrangements, a world where an entire clan could literally dream together in a single bed, if you can call a pile of sodden straw stuffed into burlap a bed. But let's take a closer look. The key characters in our saga are Tom and Edith, a couple with dreams bigger than their mattress and pillows that, well, you'll see. Tonight's entertainment, selecting the perfect support for their slumber needs. But in a time when fashionable home decor was primarily dirt and a friendly collection of fleas, this would be a quest for the ages. As the couple begins sifting through options, or rather stuffing fate first into their pile of various natural sleeping aids sourced from around the farmstead, the hope hangs thick in the air. Or is that just the scent of old cabbage? First, Tom presents the lavish goose down, soft, feathery, and the only thing that could lull even the grumpiest farm animal into dreaming of flying. If we can get it from the geese, it must be good for us too. Edith fumes back, a reluctant nod of agreement escaping her lips. But wait, there's a hidden catch. Yes, but it will attract all our neighbors who haven't slept well since 1345, and they'll flock here like it's the latest public toilet. Tom ponders, weighing their social standing against the joys of well-rested heads. Next, he introduces a cluster of old rags. They're rustic. They're earthy. They bring a touch of authenticity, Tom boasts. Edith's eyes widen in horror. It's a collection of filthy back-end rags that have probably seen more battlefields than my brother. Upon attempting it, she recoils as they scratch her neck. Who knew late-night itches could be so medieval? Then comes the pièce de résistance, a pillow stuffed with sheep's wool, a practical decision until things take an unexpected turn. As Tom enthusiastically pushes the wool into the pillowcase, Edith distinctly hears voices. Is that the wool coming alive? Not quite. It's their neighbor George practicing his explosive rendition of My Fair Lady as he entertains mice. Caught in the moment, Tom assures Edith that sheep wool was historically considered a dream enhancer. Clearly, the livestock, too, had the noble obligation of playing touch and go with human creativity. But the absurdity continues as the evening halts to a drastic search for the requested weight of a dream catcher, or, more accurately, Edith laying down the law about pillow fights. And no vulgar noises. The sheep deserve respect. Ultimately, a strange choosing ritual unfolds, layering the drama as the couple juggles these questionable decisions like between a sleep experiment and a comical failure at marriage counseling. By the end of the night, a sheep's wool pillow and a firm agreement on when to stop imitating farm animals leads Tom and Edith to bed. Curiously, through the insistent rustles of barnyard dreams and snoring symphonies, cozy comfort seems to emerge from this chaotic pillow policy. The couple sleeps surprisingly well, filling their dreams with visions of reasonably priced bed linens, which, in their era, truly is the higher ambition. So, as the dawn breaks, what have we learned? It appears that even in sleepless nights, all's well that ends with a sheep's wool pillow and perhaps the most entertaining of dreams. Picture this. It's the 12th century, somewhere in a drafty castle in England. The sun has just shimmied its way past the horizon, and the air is thick with the smell of damp stone and what can only be described as medieval body odor. Knights in heavy armor, sporting about 30 pounds of gear that hasn't seen a bath since last Tuesday, are preparing their morning ritual. And no, it's not sword fighting or lady wooing. They are getting ready for a snooze. Welcome to the bizarre world of nap time among knights, where snoozing was practically an Olympic event. Yes, you heard that right. The kind of idealistic beauty sleep they engaged in was rivaled only by the worst episode of a reality show. Largely because most of these men took their napping very seriously. Why, you ask? Because rest was essential for honing their skills in battle, of course. In their minds, every nap came with an epic narrative, perhaps a glorious resurrection after a fierce battle against one's own dreams, or an intense round of nightly espionage in Snoozeland. The setting was invariably chaotic, lit only by flickering torchlight that cast shadows reminiscent of an angry dragon on the wall. Add in the faint sounds of a court jester snoring in the corner, and the reverberating clang of someone's heavy armor clanging on the stone floor. And you've got the perfect backdrop for the napping night spectacle. Yet, adding to the absurdity were the ridiculous sleep rituals that knights practiced. Superstition was, of course, the life essence of medieval society. Before they could even think about snoozing, they would recite a charming ditty about how proper napping would keep the lice at bay. Yes, the lice. The little survivors that had begun to consider knights' beards as luxury apartments. They believed that to stave off potential evil spirits that could haunt their dreams, or worse, invade their snoring space, they needed to sleep on their left side while clutching a piece of desiccated garlic, known in today's restaurant circles as the medieval snooze blanket. And who could forget the chanting or the gentle coaxing of their allies? A knight's comrades would gather around the sleeping beauty, ensuring that no enemy ever dared to disturb their peaceful slumber, lest they be met with an agitated warrior whose wake-up call was to simultaneously swing a sword and demand breakfast. As with all good medieval tales, a turning point eventually emerged. One fated, sleep-deprived day, two knights, Sir Snorri-Olot and Sir Tossison de Turns, entered a nap-off, the ultimate test of endurance. Legends say that one knight lost his noble status entirely when he was discovered drooling on his own armor, resulting in an unfortunate loss of dignity and a brief knighthood. So, what's the lesson here? If you're a knight, take your naps seriously, because in medieval times, a little drool can lead to a whole lot of drama. In the end, if you're gonna sleep like a knight, remember, welcome to the Medieval Snooze Fest. The year is 1303. The location, a drafty stone castle in the middle of nowhere, where the sound of snoring rivals the howling winds outside. Glaring torches flicker on the walls, casting eerie shadows, and the air is thick with mildew, the scent of unwashed peasants, and the faint odor of something truly suspect cooking in the cauldron. Maybe rat stew? Who knows? Meet our motley crew. Sir Bedfellow, a knight renowned for his prowess in sleeping rather than sword fighting. Lady Drowsy, who considers a good nap an exercise in nobility. And the ever-faithful Jester, who finds his best material while half asleep in the corner. The focus of this narrative? A sizable, overly adorned bed swathed in animal furs that could house half the village's livestock. Because what's more luxurious than sharing a bed with vermin? As the evening progresses, peculiar rituals unfold. After a hearty meal of whatever passed for food that day, likely whatever squirmed in the pantry, it's rest time, but hold your snores. To ensure a most peaceful slumber, the villagers pull out their secret weapon, the Sweet Dreams Potion. This concoction, mostly consisting of well-traveled mead and a generous dash of, wait for it, dead mouse fur, is administered in the hopes of warding off nightmares of an angry monarch, or worse, the grisly sight of their own reflection in the morning. As the evening settles into a rhythm of gentle snores and the occasional startled gasp, likely due to the all-too-real fear of castle rats, chaos erupts when the jester stumbles in with tales of a restorative spirit, dubbed the Great Naplander. Rumor has it the creature lurks under beds, waiting to grant eternal sleep to those willing to trade a sheep's pelt for a moment of blissful inertia. The tension escalates as everyone secretly debates. Is the Great Naplander friendly, or is it merely a disguise for their own laziness? Escapades ensue as the villagers assemble their offerings: stale bread, old boots, and something that was definitely not a sheep's pelt, because, sustainability. Just when the tensions peak, with Sir Bedfellow attempting to best the Great Naplander in a contest of snoozing, which obviously includes an epic series of snore-offs, a surprise twist occurs. As the villagers whisper sweet nothings to lull their friend into a deep slumber, they accidentally wake a guard who had been dozing in a corner, unaware of the impending nap-off. He jumps up, claiming he spotted the dreaded Naplander. Turns out it's just a particularly fluffy cat making its rounds in search of warmth. Meanwhile, the villagers are left to ponder if they missed out on the greatest competition the medieval ages had to offer. After all, a cat claiming the title of Nap King certainly is a twist for the history books. Interestingly, napping was actually a respected pastime in various cultures, a way for the weary to gain back their strength for whatever ludicrous battles were brewing the next day. Such refreshing revelations remind us that even in the world of jousts and feasts, the noble art of napping was considered crucial, if bizarrely ritualistic. So, what's the takeaway here? In a world filled with swords and skirmishes, always remember the Middle Ages, a time when the air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the occasional whiff of burnt offerings. Here, in a cloistered village at the break of dawn, the villagers are awakening from their slumber under homespun blankets, with dreams already deemed unworthy by the local priest. In this peculiar epoch, sleep wasn't always a simple nightly affair. It was a veritable game of musical beds, with a side of treachery. Picture this: the light of dawn peeking through thatch roofs as half-dressed villagers shuffle toward a communal sleeping chamber, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight like confused moths. The air is heavy with scents both savory and questionable, fresh-baked bread mixed with the musky aroma of last night's curdled cow's milk. And the sounds? A cacophony of snores, whispers, and the odd chicken flapping around, uncertain if it was night or day. Welcoming them is Brother Wilfred, a local cleric who stands ready to preach the virtues of sleep. Sleep is a sacred time for communion with the divine, he proclaims, pretending to ignore the 20 resentful glares aimed at him from the sidelines, all longing for a return to bed. Now, you might think that these medieval folks merely sought a good night's rest, but oh, how wrong you would be. Sleep in these times was tangled in an elaborate web of superstition and downright absurdity. If the moons were right, some believed you could dream of your next spouse. If they were wrong, well, let's just say you might be levied with nocturnal visits from vengeful spirits planning for the next tiny village upheaval. The real twist, of course, was the practice of first sleep and second sleep. Imagine waking up after a solid half of your day just to sit around briefly, have a midnight snack of slightly stale herring, and engage in light chit-chat with the neighbor about last night's dreams. That's right, the original medieval sequel to anything worth sleeping over. People would rise from their slumbers, ideally between midnight and 2 a.m., and choose who to commune with. Marriage proposals, food recipes, or perhaps a riveting discussion on why peasants should be eternally grateful for the feudal system. The options were endless. However, as every good medieval story goes, an unexpected twist was lurking just around the corner. One unfortunate fellow, Sir Geoffrey the Sleepy, took it too far during one of these midnight gatherings. Intent on demonstrating the weightiness of his theories about crops and celestial alignments, he accidentally slipped into a deep sleep right in the midst of his presentation. The villagers, mistaking his slumber for divine prophecy, began crafting a makeshift shrine around him, swiftly resulting in a remarkable increase in the rumored fertility of crops, all thanks to one poorly timed nap. So, the reality of it all. Sleep was certainly not a trivial pursuit back then, And let's not forget the actual historical context behind it. Before the advent of electric lights and modern sleep science, sleep was as unpredictable as medieval weather. And what do we take away from this historical jaunt? Clearly, it's best to be strategic with sleep, lest you find yourself waking up to the startling realization that nobody in your village ever actually needed a second sleep in the first place. Picture this. The year is 1337, and we are somewhere in the dark, cramped corners of a medieval castle where daytime napping is practically a noble art form. The torches flicker ominously along the stone walls, casting shadows thick enough to hide a dozen sneaky rats and a few grimy serfs who've taken the day off due to unexpected nap fulfillment. The air smells of damp straw, sweat, and perhaps a hint of rotting, pickled herring, a smell that simply screams medieval chic. Enter Sir Percival, a night watchman with a title that sounds glorified, but actually just means he gets to stare into the darkness and curse the moon for being too bright. Sir Percival was unique in his profession, not just because of his dubious dietary habits, think stale bread and questionable cheese, but rather his almighty commitment to the noble practice of napping every 5 minutes. Why patrolling a dark castle when you can catch 40 winks on the job? So picture him now, dozing soundly on a rickety stool that creaks louder than an old lady's joints, dreaming of bountiful banquets and gory battles with dragons that taste like grilled pork. The calm of the castle night is punctured only by the distant sounds of a scuffling rat or two, the noble steed of the hungry peasant, and the soft pitter-patter of rain, which in all honesty, folks, is not a signal to wake up. However, alas, the serenity is short-lived. The king's paranoid obsession with threats has led to an obsessive setup of paranoia and panic. A bell tower, built by somebody with too much ambition and a non-existent structural engineering degree, is set to clang loudly at irregular intervals, specifically designed to catch any would-be nappers off guard. Someone could literally die of exhaustion trying to dodge this nocturnal calamity. As it stands, medieval people believed in all kinds of absurd rituals to ward off sleep-related evils. There's poor Sir Percival caught in this cycle of chaos. Recently, he heard that eating a mixture of dried herbs called dream preventers would keep his mind alert. Naturally, he interprets this as a light snack before another round of snoozing and garnishes it with mild panic about whether his fellow townsfolk will revolt due to nagging insomnia. Typically, our brave watchman tries to convince himself it's a sophisticated meal plan. In reality, it's just ground rosemary on stale bread, and perhaps a noble's shoe if he's feeling particularly adventurous. Sound appetizing? Well, history shows it works as brilliantly as a spoon trying to shoo away a wolf. But the plot thickens. His restless nights offer him visions, castles under attack, peasants demanding sleep, and a bizarre scenario featuring a royal poodle demanding to be knighted. Finally, after stumbling upon the disastrous dream preventers that turned out to be a sack of swamp herbs, Sir Percival discovers a groundbreaking solution one night. He snoozes through the bell's clang, waking only to the sounds of his own terrible snoring, devoid of any castle threats. So what moral emerges from this historical farce? Perhaps next time the king suggests a night watchman, he should default to hiring an insomniac, or better yet, provide a royal nap hall. After all, every noble soul needs their beauty. Welcome to the north of England, circa 1300, where the sheep outnumber people and men in metal suits of armor make questionable choices about their resting arrangements. The moon is casting an eerie glow over a ramshackle castle, where the air smells not of lavender, but of chainmail and regret. In the courtyard, the only thing clearer than the stars is the sound of an alarmingly loud snore echoing off the stone walls. The soundtrack of Sir Reginald, our bumbling knight, who is currently enjoying his favorite pastime, sleeping standing up. You see, in these dark medieval nights, proper sleep was seen as a luxury, not a necessity, a concept foreign to our snoring Sir Reginald, who believed that sleep could be a secondary hobby. And what better way to show off your mastery over sleep than by catching some Z's while you're technically on duty? Feeling heroic, he stands guard, completely oblivious to the fact that one does not, in fact, protect a castle by standing still, especially while teetering like a slightly overripe fruit. Loud enough to wake the village, Sir Reginald's snore reverberates through the stacked stone walls, making the battlements tremble in fear. This castle is a veritable fortress of sleep-deprived warriors, each one struggling to keep their eyes open while dreaming of less turbulent careers in farming or cheesemaking. Now, what did the knights feast on to fuel their sleepless nights? A delightful concoction of mystery meats, stale bread, and ale strong enough to boil the innards of a bear. It's no wonder they would often sleep with their swords, possibly more to defend themselves from dinner than from any oncoming enemies. Yet, despite minds fogged by questionable culinary choices and generous swigs of castle brew, many insisted that sleep training was a rigorous process involving a series of medieval nap battles in the name of honor. This training consisted of sleepless nights spent draped over one's trusty steed or hiding behind a barrel, while the more industrious knights engaged in competitions of who could nap in the most ridiculous positions without falling over. The ultimate goal was, of course, to perfect the ancient art of the power nap, to regain energy during those tedious, long-winded council meetings about goats and taxes. In a wildly unpredictable twist of fate, one of these contests went south after a knight literally fell asleep during an audience with the king. When regaled with tales of glory from last week's hunt, our knight, Sir Reginald, stood during his turn to share, and promptly dozed off, sending shockwaves through the court. The king was momentarily befuddled, then quietly enraged, and banished him to the sleepy village of Slumberington, a punishment nobody ever returned from, unless they brought back pastries. So there you have it. A night's struggle is real, with sleep being both an honor and an embarrassment rolled into a heavy metal suit. Sir Reginald's legacy? A reminder that sometimes sleeping on the job can lead to dire consequences, like being whisked away to a place where sheep are the only audience for your snoring. And remember, folks, if you find yourself struggling with insomnia, just remember the knights of old who persevered through slumber at their posts. Heroism doesn't require sleep, just imagine this. A gray October night in the 12th century, the wind howling like a banshee, and the air filled with the scent of burning livestock and desperation. Welcome to a sleepy little castle in the heart of England, where the drawbridge has been lifted, and the only thing lurking in the shadows is the displeased spirit of that goat from earlier. Tonight's entertainment? A gathering of knights ready to slay their dreams in rather peculiar fashion. In a cozy chamber lit by torches that flicker as if auditioning for a candlelit drama of their own, we find our key players. Sir Reginald the Stout, often as round as he is noble, and his trusty sidekick, the aptly named Squire Snorlot. Let's not forget the castle's resident herbalist, who is busy brewing what most would call sleeping potions, but what Sir Reginald insists are really just rather strong evening teas. Nobody ever trusts tea in the medieval world. As the nights gather, the atmosphere is thick not only with camaraderie, but also with the unmistakable stench of sheep droppings and damp wool. The room reverberates with the sounds of mocking laughter as they play a rousing game of who can fall asleep the fastest. A record they've broken 9 times already, with Sir Reginald leading the scoreboard by a hefty margin. Fear not, though, this is not just slumber. It is a competition that requires heroic levels of alcohol consumption. Pass the mead and stand back. The tension rises when the herbalist dumps a suspicious amount of valerian into Reginald's tankard, mumbling to himself about the virtues of deep slumber. The knights, strongly committed to this post-dinner ritual of heavy drinking, must now navigate the uncharted waters between intoxication and the baffling urge to find their beds before their wives do. Between sips of mead, wild claims are made. A knight's strength lies in his ability to sleep like the dead. I personally have fought 15 ogres, in my dreams, mind you. Squire Snorlot, now visibly dazed, rises to grab a slice of bread and promptly plants his face in it, snoring louder than a bullhorn at a jousting match. The culmination of the evening arrives when Reginald stands dramatically to deliver a toast. Oh, slurring and swaying, to the snores of our fathers and the dreams of our enemies. But just as he raises his cup, the unmistakable sound of a battle horn blares outside, a true test of medieval fortitude, or perhaps just a very rude disturbance. The knights tumble into action, swords drawn, and in an unexpected twist, it turns out to be a caravan of merry minstrels, too drunk to find the right path home. Reginald groans. Back to bed, lads. We've more sleep to conquer. The curtains close as these brave dreamers navigate their way to slumber once more, no doubt dreaming of more sheep and slightly more sheepish gracelessness. In summation, what have we gleaned from the comical chaos of the night's slumber party? Sometimes you have to take a hefty swing at life, or at least your mead, before you're ready to slip into that restorative slumber that medieval folk so relied upon. What did we learn here? Sleep is a battlefield, and he who snores the loudest usually sleeps the best. Picture it. The year is 1220, and we find ourselves in a dimly lit chamber of a medieval castle where sleeping beauty takes on a whole new meaning. The air is heavy with the musty scent of sheep wool. Smoky torches flicker like they're auditioning for a horror film, and the rhythmic snoring of 100 peasants can be heard echoing through the hallways. Welcome to a night at the inn, where rest is a matter of survival, and the comfort of sleeping on a bed of straw has yet to be achieved. Enter King Napsalot, a monarch whose dedication to napping rivals that of a hibernating bear. Resplendent in his lion-skin cape, he sprawls on an oversized throne that's not just for maintaining a regal posture, but also for staging his epic nightly battles with insomnia. Tonight's agenda? A classic kingly feast, followed by what he flags as his serious business of sleep. On the long wooden table, a banquet of dubious culinary choices rests before him. Roasted venison, boiled cabbage, and suspiciously crunchy bread rolls that seem to be auditioning for a role as medieval weapons. The festive clamor of the court fills the air, muffled only by the king's relentless yawning, his servants darting around like caffeinated mice trying to keep him awake. As the feast progresses, the peculiar sleeping habits of the medieval elite start revealing themselves. You see, back in the day, sleep wasn't just a time for replenishing energy. It was a finely orchestrated event, rich with eccentricities. King Napsalot, for instance, had a strict nap schedule, which he took as seriously as his crown, enforcing his royal decree that all subjects must also embrace the art of afternoon snoozing, lest they incur the wrath of a well-rested king. But it wasn't merely luxury that fueled these naps. No, there were dire pre-nap rituals involving a peculiar merge of superstition and absolute absurdity. Like clockwork, just as the kitchen was cleaning up the leftovers, a designated bed preparer would rush in to fluff pillows filled with what can only be assumed were rat furs. Silently, the chamber's astrologer consulted the stars to ensure the alignment was favorable for a night's slumber, because who doesn't want their dreams influenced by a wandering planet? And let's not forget the mysterious thumping sounds echoing in the halls. Was it just a raucous courtier attempting to sneak in a nightcap, or perhaps the spirits of those who had perished mid-yawn? Tension rises as he counts on more than just sheep peering into the darkness, half convinced he's about to be devoured by the very dreams he seeks. But the greatest twist? As our esteemed King Napsalot slumps further into his fuzzy throne, he embarks on a notorious quest. He dreams of kites that float on rainbows and lands of eternal parties, only to be abruptly awoken by a rat stealing the remains of his dinner right off the table. With a roar that could frighten off a dragon, he leaps up, startling the entire court into a frenzy. And there you have it. The truth behind a medieval king's sleep habits is revealed. It seems all the meticulously cultivated tricks didn't actually prevent sleep. They merely set the stage for chaos when the sleep was interrupted. What's the lesson, you ask? In a world where naps come with a side of intrigue, always keep one eye open. Welcome to a 14th century castle, where the nobles are gearing up for an afternoon of slumber that would put today's power naps to shame. In this dimly lit chamber, scented with the faint aroma of sweaty linen and stale ale, the atmosphere is thick with a sense of entitlement, punctuated by the occasional snores of the Duke, who has just settled into his plush, feather-stuffed coffin of a bed. The scene? A royal nap time so critical that any threats to its sanctity were dealt with more ferociously than heretics at a bonfire. Here lies our protagonist, rest assured, literally. The Duke, an imposing figure clad in fine but slightly askew garments, is the very picture of privilege. He flings his royal limbs extravagantly, smothering a hapless servant who dared to bring him a pillow while he attempted to hold court in his dreams. Today's agenda? Avoiding pesky peasant uprisings and finding a comfortable angle to perch his pointy hat. The sound of shuffling feet as the nobles' subjects tiptoe on eggshells. The only creatures more panicked than an unpaid peasant are the Duke's advisors, clutching their scrolls as though they contained state secrets. Except, in truth, they only hold instructions for the Duke's afternoon meal and a chart detailing how many peasants can reasonably be executed without causing an uprising. But as the sun casts golden rays through the high window, the Duke's nap rituals begin to bleed into the absurd. You see, the medieval elite had a distinct belief that power naps were critical for political strategy. because when else could one plan the assassination of rivals while dreaming of mutton? So, as the Duke slumbers, his cohorts huddle nearby, whispering dire warnings or lovingly sharing tales of his alleged temper, a level of concern often summarized as he needs his rest. Upon awakening from his beauty slumber, the Duke is not just rested, he is reborn. Armed with the clarity only bestowed by a mid-afternoon snooze, he rises, yawning loudly enough to wake the ancestors. And what does he say? It's time to regain my kingdom. And also, could someone fetch me a roasted peacock? Cue the royal frenzy as attendants scramble, only to find that the previously well-planned dinner has devolved into an elaborate buffet of oddly colored jellies and suspiciously unidentifiable meats. A situation not at all helped by the still-snoozing Duke, who somehow believes that anything served hot is safe enough to eat, even if it looks like a science experiment on the run. Now for the twist. It turns out the jellies? They're actually made from the Duke's own leftover dessert fiascos, carelessly assembled by oblivious cooks who mistook last week's pudding for avant-garde cuisine. So, instead of a royal feast, guests find themselves contemplating whether it's really worth risking a rebellion over dessert leftovers. Still, upon tasting the jellies, the Duke loudly decrees that they were intended as an homage to his recent dreams, leading to tepid applause and a somewhat mortified audience. Apparently, gaining wisdom while snoozing has its drawbacks. So, what's the moral of the story? Just remember, when the nobles are snoozing, their kingdoms are in chaos. But hey, at least it looks fancy while falling apart. Welcome to an evening in the year of our Lord 1300, where the wind howls outside like a banshee, suffering from a bad case of throat cancer. And within the hallowed halls of Castle Complications, the very air is a melange of baking bread and the unmistakable scent of damp wool, perfect for setting the stage for a chaotic culinary episode. The grand dining hall is aglow with flickering torches whose flames dance like they're auditioning for the role of fire hazard in the next medieval horror film. The guests, nobles and commoners alike, sit at a table long enough to establish diplomatic relations with France, all eagerly awaiting tonight's special, a dish dubbed compost stew. But don't let the less-than-appetizing name con you. This is the medieval equivalent of a 5-course meal for people who can't count that high. Made up of day-old peasant scraps mixed with fresh dandelions, it's a delicacy that ensures you'll experience something, anything really, other than sleep. Which is, of course, what everyone intends to do by the end of the evening. As the stew bubbles ominously, a quick look around reveals the real tension in the air. At tonight's event, the Superstitious Society of Soporifics has gathered, an elite group primarily focused on staying awake at the dinner table. There's Lady Marjorie, who firmly believes that eating after dusk invites nightmares. Next to her is Sir Geoffrey, whose idea of bedtime is anything but conventional, preferring to nap while standing. Yes, you read that right. Between the coughs, whispered incantations, and occasional screams of the unfortunate serving wenches who daringly approach with ladles, the atmosphere is thick enough to cut with a plastic fork. As guests indulge in the mysterious melange that might just be soup or a potion, it's anyone's guess really, panic erupts. Someone has turned over a table, claiming to have spotted a ghost in the stew. Was it just the celery? No one can be sure, but the idea of a specter simmering deep within their dinner has everyone on edge. Meanwhile, Lady Marjorie clutches her amulet, hoping it'll prevent her from dreaming of being chased through misty moors by Pudding. Suddenly, the stew is disturbed again as Sir Geoffrey throws back his head with enthusiasm matching that of someone who has just discovered the secret to eternal life. He proclaims that to ward off nightmares, a new protocol must be initiated, tossing in various odd items to beef up the stew. Bread crusts? In. Unwashed linens? Absolutely. A few random prayers? You bet. In a burst of creativity reminiscent of a toddler with finger paint, the guests begin to add their own flavors to the concoction. The climax looms as Lady Marjorie, now on the verge of hysteria, tips an entire jug of elderberry wine into the pot, claiming that only the sweetest nectar can vanquish dreams of doom. The resulting stew bubbles over with such ferocity that it's a miracle the table isn't engulfed in flames. By now, it resembles an apocalyptic soup more suited for a horror film than a feast. Against greater odds than anyone could muster, the stew is finally served. As they all tuck in, fortified by wine and the power of ridiculous superstition. Surprise? The stew is oddly delicious, creamy, rich, and a splendid distraction from the fact they all just drank too much wine and might or might not be haunted by their dinners. So what did we learn tonight? That perhaps nothing unites us more than turning potentially horrified. Welcome to the year 1348, a time when people confidently declared that a touch of death was just an alternative form of beauty. The setting? A dimly lit, urine-scented peasant hut snug against the quaint backdrop of a plague-infested village. The soundtrack? The incessant moaning of the neighbors, an inspiring symphony of despair punctuated by the occasional fit of coughing that would make one think they were listening to a medieval version of the Ramones. Meet our protagonist, Edgar, a man whose hobbies include rambling about curses and avidly avoiding anything that remotely resembles hygiene. His sleeping arrangement consists of a heap of filthy straw, located precisely in the corner where the light of day and other living beings seldom dare to intrude. Dinner, if you want to call it that, is a frightening goulash of yesterday's leftovers, or mystery stew as he prefers to call it, known for its haunting but deliciously dubious array of flavors, mostly rank meat, a splash of mold, and a hint of regret. Now, during these dark ages, sleep wasn't just about counting sheep and stitching together dreams of a brighter future. No, indeed. It was a thrilling gamble with nightmares and bogeymen just waiting to capitalize on the hour of subconscious vulnerability. Edgar had a nightly ritual, a blend of superstition and sheer despair. He'd first place a garlic clove under his pillow because, apparently, even in sleep you had to ward off vampires and chatty ghosts. Then he'd absolutely lose his mind by drowning himself in the verses of a local bard who believed in the power of incantations. For if there's one thing Edgar knew well, it's that sweet dreams are often overshadowed by bad pranks from the spirits of his forefathers. So, in this world of insomniac dread and fantastical fears, a peculiar challenge arose. Everyone in town believed that eating during the witching hour would summon hostile spirits. One night, as Edgar clutched his half-eaten loaf of moldy bread, something snapped. Maybe it was the mold, maybe it was his imagination, but something whispered sweet nothings about second breakfasts in his ear, promising him life everlasting, or at least until morning. And lo, he bravely consumed a hunk of what he believed to be stale bread, possibly infused with unholy grains. Fast forward to the morning after, Edgar wakes up to find himself surrounded, not by demons or witches, but by his fellow villagers. They cheer him on, for he had survived an actual night of fear. Realization dawns. You see, in this charming little village, the true plot twist was that no one believed Edgar was brave. They all thought he had accidentally eaten the legendary bread of dreams, a fantastical loaf rumored to provide prophecies and mildly embarrassing kung fu skills. Thus begins a new chapter in Edgar's life. Everyone turns to him for wisdom, and he obliges with questionable advice fueled by hallucinations from the bread binge. People start lining up at dawn to receive his prophecies, which usually consisted of effusive recommendations for more garlic and a solid disdain for anything furry. So remember, when it comes to sleep, fear not the nightmares, but rather the irresistible lure of midnight snacks that might catapult you into an existence of Picture this. The year 1175. A cozy little village in what would one day be known as England. Candlelight flickers through the wafting smoke of burning drachmas, and the air smells vaguely of livestock. Consider it the perfume of authenticity. The townspeople, engaged in their most esteemed activity, napping. Yes, a concept that would make the great philosophers proud and likely leave them wondering why the 21st century fell victim to the tyranny of 9 to 5. Welcome to the sleepy realm of a medieval village where one's power naps were akin to posting on social media. The more elaborate your snooze setup, the more influence you wielded. You could know nothing about governance or the price of grain, but if you bedded down in the finest feather mattress, congratulations. You just became the village's most esteemed slumber expert. In this bustling arena of dreams, you could hear the rhythmic snoring of peasants, punctuated by the occasional cackle from the tavern across the street. Yes, the bartender was delivering his own special brew that had all the fun properties of your grandma's arthritis cream. And those hit-the-snooze ritual pieces? A fascinating melange of pigskin blankets and chips of straw filled with potent dreams, of squishing rats underfoot while trying to make a perfect train set, or the baffling search for the meaning of life at the bottom of a pottage pot. But napping wasn't just a personal pursuit, it was a social experiment on a grand scale. Town elders had a penchant for enforcing sleeping rituals with all the same authority as an obstinate parent. You must snooze now, or your dreams will become dreams of your enemies. And how did they enforce this? Each village had an established dream council responsible for epidemic snoozing. They would break into homes and use a traditional alarm made from a cowbell, insistent clanging that said, "Get up or be late for your nap." What a paradox. But of course, towards the end of the village's snooze cycle, things tend to get borderline ridiculous. The Dream Council's president, known affectionately as the Great Napster, had one goal: to promote the true napping spirit of the medieval lifestyle. Thus, an annual event was born: the Nap Olympics. Yes, you heard that right. Events ranged from the 100-meter nap dash, which was less about speed and more about falling into a deep slumber quickly, to the synchronized snoozing, where the average family of farmer and sheep would compete for points based on synchronized snoring. The climax of this whimsical affair occurred during the finals of the Great Nap-Off when, startled by a neighboring village's rogue rooster, the snorers were thrown into chaos. The sound reverberated like a cannonball through a cathedral, echoing panic across the sleepy crowd. The sheep decided it was snack time, while farmers lay dazed and confused, wondering whose nap was more glorious. This little fiasco enlightened an entire generation to a long-held secret. Sometimes, the perfect nap can lead to utter disarray, confusion, and the long-lost art of yelling at farm animals. And in the end, medieval villagers learned a valuable lesson. Nothing beats a good nap unless a bratty rooster decides to ruin it. Cue the candlelit corridor of a medieval castle where the year is 1327, and sleep is as precious as a golden-crusted goblet. The atmosphere? A mix of musty wool, faint candle smoke, and the peculiar aroma of unwashed linen that's been ignored ever since King Richard declared laundry a sensitive subject. Tonight, we meet our honorable guest, Lord Sir Snoozington. Inexplicably rich and overly fond of his downy bed, he dreams of wealth while lounging in a chamber filled with shockingly orange tapestries that scream royalty, but smell more like a village pig. The protagonist of our saga, an oversized feather mattress that would put a cloud to shame, or push a very angry cloud to its limits. At dusk, as the last rays of the sun struggle against the castle walls, Sir Snoozington retires for a nap, blissfully unaware that just outside, a motley crew of servants is having a scrumptiously chaotic dinner of gruel that would embarrass even the most benevolent oatmeal. But alas, they tread lightly, for in the darkened hallways of this medieval palace, to awaken the Lord is to court disaster. In the realm of napping, Sir Snoozington's affluent lifestyle afforded him a routine that rivaled even the most elaborate royal opera. He adhered to the sacred medieval belief that sleeping outside of actual slumber hours would somehow garner him prophetic dreams. Yes, the nobles were utterly convinced that tossing and turning too much could lead to receiving subliminal messages from the barracks of heaven, which precisely explains why he has enlisted the aid of a cup-bearer who moonlights as a dream facilitator. This esteemed gentleman is responsible for propping Sir Snoozington's head up at 7 p.m., while whispering prophetic bedtime stories via a dubious pamphlet he calls The Noble Guide to Dreams and Naptastic Insights. But wait, the absurdities don't stop there. The townsfolk have developed a paranoia regarding oversleeping that could only be rivaled by their fear of dragons. Rumor has it that sleeping beyond the sun's rise would lead to your soul being harvested by a wayward spirit seeking weekend plans. Yes, that's right. Lordly dozing led to a bogeyman waiting to whisk you off to his nap festival, where they serve only the hottest of gruel. The entire village, in the spirit of vigilance, hired a wake-up banger, a gentleman whose sole responsibility was to knock pots and pans around at dawn, screeching alarmingly near Sir Snoozington's window. This expert alarmist would quite literally clang his way into history, chased by a flock of half-awake peasants hoping to pummel their own laying tormentor. As our Lord lay deep in slumber, the wake-up banger storms forth with the enthusiasm of a caffeinated squirrel. With every clang that echoes through the castle, his high-pitched cries reach a crescendo. "Wake up, or the fates shall condemn you to an eternity of snoring." Sir Snoozington stirs, startled out of a dream about being crowned king by a horde of loyal puppies. As his eyes flutter open, he gasps in horror, shrieks, and implores his trusty cupbearer for help, only to find out they forgot to prepare his dream coffee, a concoction made from enchanted beans that, ironically, help one wake up. The climax, as Sir Snoozington stumbles groggily into the banquet hall, panicked servants point to a mysterious heap in the corner. It's the wake-up banger, beaten senseless by an audience of disgruntled peasants whose lives remained woefully bestowed upon sleep deprivation. The moral of our tale? Napping may be noble, but oversleeping can land you in the middle of a medieval melee. Or worse, missing breakfast. So remember, if you find yourself too cozy in bed, in a world where life expectancy was shorter than a drawn-out sneeze, the peasants of medieval Europe had a fascinating approach to sleep. Set the scene. The year is around 1350. The place is a smoky, dark, thatched hut, where every creak of the floorboards is a dramatic cliffhanger, and the smell of unshowered humanity is an immersive experience for the unsuspecting nose. As twilight falls, our hero, a plucky peasant named Thaddeus, prepares for bed. He pulls down a roughly woven sack full of straw, and voila, it's the height of luxury. Candlelight flickers, casting spooky shadows that dance along the walls, perfectly punctuating the soundtrack of livestock snoring just outside. But lo, what's that? A delightful frisson of anxiety as everyone in the hut grapples with the essence of true darkness, a chamber pot half full, and the certainty that any noise might be a lurking troll or the ghosts of missed harvests. So how does one get to sleep when demonic nightmares and tax collectors loom large? The answer? Let the superstitions reign supreme. Thaddeus, after weaving prayers to ward off nighttime spirits, adorns his straw sack with various herbs, because apparently the smell of sage is a certified nightmare repellent. Meanwhile, the local witch, she of the spindly fingers and a penchant for hexes, sold dream-catching charms that, while overpriced and possibly cursed, were more than one could ask to alleviate the grave dread of slumber. As the hour of sleep descended, the tension in the air thickened. Thaddeus begins his nightly ritual of bewaring all things posteriors, influenced by the most ludicrous of medieval hens. No, literally, because they were convinced their tails dragged on the floor in dreams, causing swelling in the morning that might disguise grave misfortunes. This phenomenon was common, of course, which led to people clutching their rear ends in frantic fear, hoping they didn't wake up as chicken-shaped lumps. But here comes the twist. Surprisingly, the dreams are profoundly mundane in nature, a series of bizarre yet comedic encounters with fictitious farm animals debating the merits of crop rotation. Who knew that a cow could dish out existential advice about the futility of hay consumption? And suddenly, after a night of chaotic farm animal counseling sessions, the rooster crows at dawn, brutally reminding the peasants of reality and their inescapable debts. Thaddeus awakens not with the terror haunting his thoughts, but with the hilariously absurd face of Sir Cluckington perched on his windowsill. In real medieval history, sleep was less about comfort and more about evading nocturnal threats, be they external or internal demons. Sleep was precious yet heavily laced with worry, attempting to distill into dreamy periods of non-existence. So what's the moral of this nighttime fiasco? Even peasants need their beauty sleep. Just make sure it's not haunted by judgmental livestock. Picture the year 1400. Just outside a quaint little village in England known for its excellent sheep and uniquely persuasive snoring. The sun is setting, casting a warm hue over the thatched roofs as a cacophony of evening sounds rises. Clucking chickens competing with disgruntled geese and the obligatory cries of distant sheep worried about their ear-splitting neighbors. Enter our protagonist, Lord Harold, a nobleman whose dedication to napping is rivaled only by his commitment to extravagantly awkward social interactions. Surrounded by an entourage of chattering squires who exist solely to serve as a living reminder of why his insomnia isn't a complete downfall, Harold is ready to confront his arch-nemesis, the dreaded evening slumber. Tonight's meal is a veritable feast of bland porridge, presented with the fanfare typically reserved for royal banquets. The highlight? A bread roll so rock-hard it could double as a projectile weapon. The air is thick with the aroma of simmering oats and an underlying smell of disappointment, combined with the faint hint of Lord Harold's last battle with gout. Here's where the plot thickens. As the meal progresses, a tension emerges. An agonizing battle between his desire for sleep and the incorrigible noise of the village still buzzing outside. Local rumors abound that those who sleep without a proper blanket risk being visited by mischievous night goblins, tiny, invisible, skeezy creatures who may steal your warmth and, in a plot twist, your very essence. This leads to an absurdly complex ritual involving layers of ancient superstition built upon advice from medieval fortune-tellers, who often had questionable motives. Lord Harold, believing himself to be the chosen guardian against the night goblins, shrouds himself in his grandmother's most prized possession, a patchwork blanket endowed with the not-so-comforting motto, "Good luck keeping it." The villagers would chuckle behind their doors, convinced that proper sleep was a mythical creature entirely removed from medieval routines. Eventually, as twilight thickens into a warm blanket of darkness, Harold's struggle escalates. A squire nervously informs him that the night is ripe for goblin mischief, but luckily for Harold, he's prepared. After unrolling a scroll labeled the Noble Napper's Quixotic Prayer for Safety, he begins fumbling through incantations ostensibly designed to ward off goblins, villainous spirits, and uninvited relatives. As he mumbles the final line, "May my dreams be devoid of rival lords," something extraordinary unfolds. A loud hiccup from a nearby sheep echoes through the night, drowning out Harold's plea. In an ironic twist, the sheer abruptness of farm life catapults him into a deep slumber, utterly unbothered by potential goblins as the world around him stands still. When morning comes, Harold awakens blissfully unaware, wrapped snugly in his protective blanket, while nearby villagers squabble about the sudden disappearance of their prized goose, undoubtedly the work of the mischievous goblin clan possibly having pursued sleep themselves. And so the lesson rings true through the ages. Always secure your precious blankets. Picture it. England, 1580, in the charmingly quaint town of Ware, where everything is as normal as a transistor radio in a medieval castle. Enter the Great Bed of Ware, a monstrous structure the size of a small barn, practically daring anyone to sleep in it without a full army of nightmares following right behind. The bed itself is a hodgepodge of fabrics, a chaotic quilt of wool, linen, and perhaps the occasional peasant's shirt. If you squint, you could almost call it art. The air? Thick with the scent of morning dew, various body odors, and the lingering aroma of the last night's stew that wafts from the bedraggled pillows. As dusk settles in, a cacophony of sounds surrounds us. Roosters crowing at unexpected hours, the distant whinny of a horse that seems to laugh at the idea of sleep, and the ever-ominous rustling of bedding that might just house a few more critters than intended. Now introduce our key players, the lucky souls who dare to call this oversized mattress home tonight. A couple attempting to navigate their marital bliss atop the proverbial mountain of chaos, bouncing around like circus clowns, and a cluster of nocturnal guests, 5 of their closest friends, because who wouldn't want to share their dreams, and likely their bed bugs. In this cozy yet horrifying scenario, the tension rises as our couple braves the terrifying prospect of nighttime. You see, this is not merely a sleeping arrangement, but a monstrous celebration of communal dysfunction. Medieval etiquette dictates that sharing a bed is a show of familial solidarity. Want to save on heating costs? Bring in the relatives. Want to ensure no one sleeps through the danger, or, say, the murderous intruder? Invite everyone to spoon. With the candles flickering ominously like the world's smallest disco, our fearless friends prepare for their big slumber party. But wait, they must first appease the spirits that dwell within the great bed. A quick round of incantations to fend off restless spirits, followed by the obligatory chant, "Sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite," and a dramatic swear that modern pest control is for cowards. As giggles fill the room, the couple rolls into battle positions, only to discover rules that seem to mock sensible behavior. There's a stricter process here than in a medieval courtroom. The first to doze off must wear the crown of snoring, while the last one awake takes up the noble task of shooshing the earth-shattering snores threatening to peel the wallpaper. The climax of our episode? Just as everyone settles into a precarious equilibrium, with legs intertwined in a manner that would puzzle yoga instructors, a loud crash echoes from the window. Enter a raccoon, the nocturnal embodiment of chaos that throws the party into complete disarray. Pillows and partners fly in different directions as medieval mayhem descends, tossing the couple out of the bed and into the wild unknown of the night. In the aftermath, everyone tumbles out, possessed by 2 prevailing truths. Never ignore a raccoon in the 16th century, and expect your friends to fly out of bed as if launching into the Renaissance Olympics. Oh, and let's not forget the Great Bed of War's original use, a tourist attraction, because why wouldn't you pay to sleep next to 5 friends and a raccoon? So, what have we learned? When in doubt, share your dreams, your bedbugs, and always, always, in a time when the Black Death was a mere cough away, we find ourselves in a dimly lit medieval village circa 1348, where the atmosphere is thick with suspicion, rotting vegetables, and an aroma of despair that lingers like an uninvited guest at a party. As the sun sets ominously behind the crumbling stones, the villagers bustily gather around their favorite nightly ritual, unceremoniously collapsing into a heap of hay after a long day of pondering death and the contents of their porridge. Enter Agnes, a peasant woman whose sleep habits are rivaled only by her knack for suspected witchcraft. Armed with a handmade rag, she wipes her brow and exhales the day's worries, before calling upon the spirits to deliver a restful night, or, at the very least, keep the rats at bay. It's not that the rats are bad, but I prefer my dreams lacking in rodent, she quips to no one, as the waning daylight casts ghastly shadows that look suspiciously like their neighbors' last harvest. The village is alive with an orchestra of sounds that are anything but soothing. Dogs bark warnings, children wail without reason, and the sound of the occasional church bell tolls like a cruel reminder of the impending doom everyone chooses to ignore, preferring instead to focus on their sleep rituals, which include chanting, the occasional herbal tea brewing, and worrying about the lingering stench of decaying crops that could easily become ghostly apparitions in the night. Dinner holds little comfort as well. Porridge, a grayish goo that trades its nutritional value for the ability to haunt dreams, becomes everyone's staple. Agnes, foregoing a fire in favor of superstition, insists that ashes from last year's unresponsive firewood possess the power to ward off nightmares. She thus sprinkles a light dusting of soot on her supper as an offering to the latent spirits of the land, who she believes will permit her to enjoy a peaceful night's nap, free from unwanted visions of plague and despair. But just as the villagers prepare for what they hope will be a sweet surrender into slumber, a commotion arises. Old Balthus, a notorious narcoleptic and self-appointed village alarmist, attempts a midnight raid on the local well for a drink and whispers about witches encroach upon the hallucinogenic minds of the half-asleep. Flailing wildly under the influence of questionable mushrooms, he shouts omens that make half the village question if their hayloft is in fact haunted. Panic ensues as villagers leap from their beds, temporarily forgetting that lurking outside is the very real threat of pestilence. In this moment of chaos, it is revealed that old Balthus had actually mistaken a stray cat for a witch, and his screams had only disturbed the peaceful slumber of several mice who were inadvertently involved in the night's drama. The madness subsided, and as villagers returned to their makeshift beds, a hushed whisper passed through the crowd. What's a witch without a cat anyway? Thus, the village fell back into uneasy dreams, haunted by visions of rats, plague, and the most terrifying prospect of all, waking up too early. What we ultimately learn from our medieval friends is that sometimes the best remedy to an onset of existential dread after a long day is to embrace a little sleep magic. So next time you're tossing and turning, just remember, maybe it's the rats you need to thank for your sober realism. Sleep tight, and don't let the bedbugs, or old Balthus, bite. As we conclude this absurd journey through the sleep habits of medieval folk, let's take a moment to reflect on the grand illusion of humanity's control over animals. We might fancy ourselves the masters of the beastly realm, donning our crowns while ruling over cats that ignore us, dogs that steal our socks, and horses that seem far too adept at steadfastly refusing to move. Surely we're the great planners of this wild kingdom. Yet over the ages, history is punctuated by animal vengeance. Take the notorious tale of the farmer's goose, who, sick of his diet of stale crumbs, mobilized the entire flock against their slumbering owner, leaving him with nothing but a broken sense of dominance and an empty barn. Or let's not forget the infamous Ostrich Uprising of 1820, a riot that involved plumes, feathers, and quite a lot of angry squawking. Truly a sight to behold. History teaches us that when you underestimate the intent of your furry or feathered friends, you risk becoming the next high-profile casualty in the saga of animal retribution. Ironically, the more they stand by us for warmth at night, the more they plot their revenge right beneath our duvet covers. So, next time you pet your dog, remember that the wagging tail you see may not be a sign of affection or excitement. It might just be a warning. Perhaps that tail isn't wagging at all. Perhaps it's winding up to deliver a sharp reminder that you are indeed under their subservient thumb or paw. In the grand tapestry of medieval sleep lore and animal uprising, one truth resounds louder than the clinks of a peasant snoring. Whether nestled with sheep or graced by a hog, We should never underestimate the devious ambitions of our animal companions who might just be biding their time for the ultimate coup. So, as we shut our eyes tonight beneath the brilliant stars, let us not simply drift off to sleep, but rather consider the implications of our furry friends plotting in the shadows. Because in the end, maybe the real lesson here is that if that dog is wagging his tail, he's winding up, and sleep may never be quite the same again. And remember, never let your guard down. After all, the most fearsome thing in the night might not be a witch at your window, but that slumbering cat, preparing to shove you right off the bed at 3 a.m.